And welcome back to the second part of The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. I'm Annette Young, filling in for François Picard, who of course has been in Washington reporting on what has been an extraordinary election result. And as the world begins to process a Donald Trump victory, just how different is Trump's America going to be? Certainly, the world's media were quick to judge as to what lies ahead, such as the French newspaper Libération, with its headline, Trumpocalypse. So I can't even say it. Trumpocalypse, can I say? Trumpocalypse, thank you. Then Britain's Daily Mirror, illustrating, of course, the Statue of Liberty under a Donald Trump rule. And finally, one from where I come from, the Australian Daily Telegraph with the capital letters WTF. No, not what you're all thinking, but in small letters below, will Trump fail? And who best to discuss what life in Trump's America will be like but the Daily Beast foreign editor and Paris bureau chief, Christopher Dickey. Hello again. Rachel Donadio, New York Times correspondent. Régis Le Sommier, the deputy editor at Paris Match, and Janat Jalil, a British journalist and broadcaster. Christopher, now, on top of winning the presidency, according to the Moscow Times, Donald Trump apparently has also become an honorary Russian Cossack. An invitation has apparently gone out from the Urbis Cossack group, bestowing the billionaire with the title. I imagine the mood in the State Department and among American intelligence services is not exactly upbeat at the moment.
Maybe he can join Depardieu and Steven Seagal and become a Russian citizen. That would be good. I mean, that would help bring the countries together. Look, I mean, the thing about Trump is we've never been able to understand exactly why he was so much in love with Vladimir Putin, why he repeatedly expressed his admiration for him, why when the Republican platform was being written, the only part that Trump's people worked hard to change was the part where they basically said they were going to arm Ukraine against Soviet aggression. Well, no, that was out. We're not going to, I mean, not Soviet, excuse me, Russian aggression. That was out. So we've never been able to figure that out. Is that a money connection, a philosophical connection? Is Putin just playing him? And my feeling is that Putin is just playing him. He knows how to massage his ego. He knows how to deal with his people. We wrote a long piece in the Daily Beast about at least 4 people on his staff who've had important roles, who've also done a lot of work and gotten a lot of money from Russia and from its surrogates. You know, so maybe money is part of it, but I don't think that's what it is with Trump himself. I think he's, how shall I say it? I think he is somebody whose ego can be stroked in a certain way, and I think Putin has done it, and his people have done it.
Can I say I disagree totally?
Okay. You can disagree.
Good luck, Regis.
Yes. No, I think, you know, right now, the tension with Russia, you know, and especially around Syria and the issue of Ukraine are so high that, you know, we have come to the point where I was, you know, talking to Dominique de Villepin recently, who put out in his book the fact that never since the end of the Cold War has the tension been so high. So if Donald Trump, if one of good things Donald Trump could bring is ease that tension, I'm not making projection on whether he will succeed or, but what I'm saying is that if he gets along with Vladimir Putin, that would be much better for the world.
But the question...
Obama and Putin, let me finish. Obama and Putin never got along. Guess what? So the whole diplomacy, the whole
where does that leave NATO?
The whole tools of the system, you know, the only people that were talking was Lavrov and Kerry, and they've been talking and they've been holding that diplomacy for a long time. So sometimes when you have 2 leaders that have good relation, it can change things. Look at Reagan and Gorbachev.
Oh, look at George W. Bush and Putin. He looked into his heart. Look at the reset with Hillary Clinton.
No, I'm talking, you know...
But you're talking about
I'm not naive at all.
You are being naive about
really,
the Russians.
and the ideas that were behind Hillary Clinton were the type of idea that would probably lead the world to World War III.
Oh, really?
Yes, it would have been.
Really, Regis, I don't believe that
and
for a second.
neocons that were behind them
Excuse me, Regis.
taking a tough
Excuse me, Regis.
and
When Putin
Donald
takes
Trump,
Crimea,
if anything
when
that
Putin takes Crimea, what do? You say, oh, too bad. When he starts a war in Donbass...
Crimea was part of Russia, and that was something...
okay, so we give up Crimea. Okay, well, we're just, you're on the record on that. And starting a war in Donbass, how about that? Was that okay?
I've never said that. Don't blame me for what I'm
I'm
talking
from
about
a
the two-man.
Point of view,
I'm talking about the two-man. I'm talking about escalation.
Can I just interject here?
And this is something that could bring some peace to that escalation.
Could I interject?
Sure.
Going away from the bromance, if you look at it more geopolitically, where does this leave NATO? Because Trump has made it clear that he doesn't believe in NATO. He thinks America is shouldering too much of the burden. And without that American backing for Europe, what does this mean for European security? If Russia, for instance, was decide to go into the Baltic states, what could the Europeans do? Because without that American security umbrella, we are in a very vulnerable position. And we're now hearing from the EU that they want to create a European army. And that's causing some concern because we already have the criticism of a lot of European nations that they don't contribute enough to NATO. So how are these nations going to contribute to a European army? And how is any European army going to compete against the security protection that NATO offers?
Let me just, because Rachel, you've been very quiet on this end, and I just want to ask you.
Watching the show.
I'm afraid we were looking for you to contribute as well. But clearly, there's no doubt, there's a lot of nervousness, isn't there, among the former Soviet states as a result of Donald Trump being elected. If you talk to people in Lithuania, in Latvia, in Estonia, and obviously in Ukraine, they feel worried that they're about to be abandoned by Washington.
Well, it changes the power dynamics globally completely, and in the end, it seems that Russia is the superpower right now, and the United States is trying to figure out what its position is. So it would necessarily terrify, I think, a lot of former Soviet republics and other countries. The thing that's quite remarkable about all this is, it's just, I don't know, the thing I'm still coming to terms with, like so many of us, is just the election happens and just everything, everywhere, on every level, everywhere around the world changes. So...
Well, let's talk about the Islamic State, a more threatening danger.
What do they think?
We're about 2 days from the celebration. No, this is serious. We're 2 days from the 1 year celebration of the attacks in Paris. If, we have something on the ground, what Trump said makes perfectly sense about the Islamic State. He said, if the Russian can contribute getting rid of the Islamic State, I'm all for it. And this is going to change things on the ground. Instead of having the Americans trying to arm moderate rebels who end up being surrogates of Al-Qaeda, well, then maybe that's going to clarify things, like maybe like it's on the ground already. But if this could be clarified for good, like the Russian takes care of the West and the Americans take care of the East, then we can come down and put an end to the caliphate. This is something that was wished a year ago by François Hollande, to have a global coalition against the Islamic State.
With Assad.
Guess what?
Where's Assad?
So where does this leave Assad?
Well, my priority, and I think it should be everybody's priority, is to put an end to people that attack us. And Assad never attacked us.
Assad created ISIS. He did a huge amount
the
to
Americans
ISIS.
created ISIS in their own jail. Kambuka. You know it very well.
Oh, the Iraqi component, yes.
Where was Baghdadi, by the way, held in prison? Kambuka.
Sure.
Where was Adnani held in prison?
In Syria.
Abu Ghraib.
It was in Syria.
That was not in Syria. Adnani was in Iraq with Gaddafi. I cover this, and Iraq is the birthplace of ISIS. It's not Syria.
And
now, the Syrian civil war
but that's
was
10
an
years
element.
ago.
Can I
That's
just
10 years ago.
Anyway,
can I
It's
just point
important.
out?
That's the type of...
Can I just point out
Yes.
that maybe this is the Trump influence on all of us? 'Cause we're now
Oh, no, this is
speaking.
too much fun, really.
We're now
I don't think
speaking.
it's funny at all.
I didn't say it
Speaking
was
on,
funny.
across it one another. But let me just bring back the conversation to the impact that a Donald Trump victory is going to have on the world.
Can I say, I don't want to defend Trump exactly, but I do think when we're discussing some of these things, I think that we tend to fall into the patterns that we saw during the campaign, where we take a little bit of what he says and we blow it up into a huge policy statement. That's not necessarily true. He didn't say he was going to abandon NATO. What he said
didn't.
about NATO was that people should pay their own way.
Yes, absolutely.
And that was taken by Ukraine, probably by the Russians, and certainly by the Baltics as an indication that he was not going to stand firm behind them. But that's not the same thing as not standing firm behind them.
Rachel.
Also, we don't really know what his policies are going to be. He changes his mind all the time.
He's
It's
a
going to be-
flip-flopper, isn't he?
Absolutely. In a past election, he would have been accused of flip-flopper and lost. But, the real question, I think, will be who will be his advisors, and then where will they steer him?
Do you think, for instance, that he's really serious in his intention to deport 11 million undocumented migrants?
I mean, this is an era of post-fact journalism. I really don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think that he would have to get that through Congress, and I think that would be very hard to do.
If I may, if you read his 10-point program that he presented on August 31st, he talks about that. That's the framework. But the problem, again, is that he has this kind of dog whistle rhetoric, which not only the crazy right wing, the Ku Klux Klan, those people fall for, but that the press focuses on. And in fact, his 10-point program, while it has a lot of crazy stuff in it, has a few very reasonable points in it.
Well, let's talk about trade because, the reality is so many things have gone out the window, all the certainties that used to be in place. For instance, the fact that the Republican Party was a party of unfettered free trade, not so much now in terms of Trump wanting to sort of renegotiate the NAFTA deal, and surprisingly Canada's Justin Trudeau is saying that he's very happy to meet with Donald Trump in the next few days. What do you think is likely to unfold, Christopher, on that front?
Well, I think he's going to have a lot of trouble on the trade front because, on the one hand, the party that he ran as the head of, as the nominee of, is still essentially a free trade party. They still believe in that as a fundamental part of business. And Trump himself, by constantly harping on the idea that we had to renegotiate this, renegotiate that, again, the thing to understand about him with foreign policy is that he's transactional. He's a businessman. He thinks he can approach these treaties as if they were a contract for building a building, and he can renegotiate it if he doesn't like the terms. Maybe he can. He wants to do that. I'm sure he wants to do that with Iran. The idea that he's just going to tear up every treaty and throw it out is probably misleading. He's going to threaten to do that and then see if he can get better terms. I'm starting to sound like a shill for Trump, but I think, in fact, that is what he thinks he's going to do.
Do you think that, in other words, he's going to be dealing, with the realities of governing as opposed to being able to stand on the...
President Trump is going to possibly be very different from candidate Trump, because what he was able to do as a candidate was tap into that disaffection that a lot of people felt in America. But now he has achieved his goal of becoming president. I think he is a pragmatist. He's going to deal with the realities out there. And he's already sort of changed his mind so much. He's already backed away from the pledge to build the wall and to not allow Muslims into America. And actually, it was quite striking after his victory, how he talked about how he was going to bring in this great infrastructure program and create all these jobs. And I thought, wow, that sounds much more like Roosevelt, FDR, the Democrats after the Second World War, after the New Deal, rather than the Republicans. And he's actually taken on his own party, the Republicans, who a lot of people were disaffected with, and shown them that this is a way to win over the lower educated, poorer Americans, because traditionally those kind of people haven't voted for Republicans, and he's managed to win them over.
Yeah, it's going to be a big problem. He's going to have a big problem with the Republican Party because he wants to be a good president. This is what you see when he meets with Obama. This is what you see in his victory speech. He wants to, I think when he's absolutely sincere when he says he wants to be the president of all the people. But what is the way he works? He works by building things, by going into debt, by going bankrupt, by spending as much money as you can possibly spend to get something done. And this Congress isn't going to let him do it. His own Congress isn't going to let him do it.
Yes, but he is going to have untrammeled power, isn't he, in terms of having a Republican-controlled House of Representatives and a Republican control of the Senate, and not to mention possibly vacancies coming up on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, no, I mean, he can undo Obama in 5 minutes. I mean, he can undo a lot of, I think, what Obama achieved quite quickly. I think he'll have to pick his targets, and I mean, he seems to have a lot of them, but I don't know where I'll start.
Do you have any sense of, in terms of who is likely to be in his cabinet. We're certainly hearing a lot of names. Newt Gingrich, Regis, is a possible Secretary of State.
We also hear somebody who's General Michael Flynn, who formerly was the head of the
DIA.
Yes, and you know, Flynn knows his business. You know, he was the guy behind the Zarqawi assassination. You know, he topped this, you know, the #1 terrorist back then when he was in Iraq, and he certainly has real connections and he's able to, you know, he's somebody really serious. So. Other than that, it's debatable. I mean, I don't know what's
Rudy Giuliani, the former New York mayor, is another name that's being touted. Yeah.
So
Ann Coulter as press secretary.
Yes, or is it Steve Bannon as head of Breitbart as possibly being his press secretary? At the moment, obviously, there's a lot of speculation because we really don't know what lies ahead, obviously, and people's names are being floated around. But I want to come back to some of the issues that possibly he is going to have to deal with relatively quickly. And Regis, I know we had a very lively discussion there about Syria, but again, I would just like to ask your opinion on what do you think he will be able to do given the realities on the ground in Syria at the moment?
Well, the reality on the ground has gotten so complex, and there's so many dynamics and so many different people, you know, in Syria and in Iraq also. And sometimes the people that the U.S. is supporting in Iraq, the very same people they don't support in Syria. So there's definitely a need of clarification from the American position. I think, you know, in fairness, John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov tried to do their best at some points, and many times. These guys should, you know, if you know, at one point the crisis in Syria is resolved, these guys should get credit for, you know, having kept the two big powers at play in contacts at least. And so what should be done, because, you know, recently you had the push south of Turkey and Erdogan playing his card over there, not only in Syria but also in Iraq, you know, saying I have to have a say about the Mosul, you know, the fall of Mosul, and I want to be there. And some people, you know, especially the Iraqis, saying to him, you know, stay in your corner and don't go there. So no, I'm, you know, to go back to what I've said before, I do hope that these powers are going to come to terms in a more going to fight the Islamic State without thinking of your own interest, going to fight the Islamic State thinking what are you going to put on the ground in the places you've liberated. That's crucial. If you put the Hajj al-Shabi, the Shia militia to rule Mosul, that's not a good thing. If you put the Peshmerga to rule Mosul, that's not a good thing, given, you know, the very, very tough historical relation between the Arabs and the Kurds. So these things should be planned ahead. The humanitarian situation you just described before the program is working somewhat, you know, with, you know, a number of tents that have been, you know, given by the UNHCR, and people are filling in, but there's still 1 million people in Mosul, and Aleppo is another huge problem where the Russians are directly confronted with the fate of the Syrian opposition, which is something that's at stake over there. The Russian strategy of and the Syrian government strategy of encircling the rebels and getting them to submit and leave. But if the rebels leave Aleppo, then they will find a shelter in the Idlib province, which is next door. What can they possibly offer for a future as an alternative to the Assad regime? All these questions are at stake right now. And
okay, at this point, let's bring.
I'd like to hear Christopher.
Well, I'm sure Christopher's going to say something, but I also want to ask Christopher about the Iran deal coming off the back of Syria.
Well, it dovetails with this. So you've got. I think one can make the argument that as morally ghastly as Assad is, finally, you could say we blew it. There was never any success in building a kind of opposition that could really take him on. And once the Russians intervened, they saved him. And so what do we do? What's the realistic way to do with that? I would agree that you could do that. I think there's a real problem with getting in bed in any way, shape, or form with Assad, but I can understand that. I think that Putin basically is going to eat Trump for lunch in a lot of different areas, but that's not what you asked. Iran is an ally of Russia now. Iran is with Assad. Russia has a coherent policy in which they are allied with Iran, they are allied with Assad, and they are allied with Iran and Hezbollah. Is that what Trump is going to do? No. What Trump is going to do is challenge the nuclear treaty with Iran and, presumably, on the basis of what he said, start to try and reimpose sanctions on Iran. How are you going to square that? If you're looking for a coherent policy, Russia's got it, and Trump doesn't in that framework. And it doesn't matter whether he's got a good relationship with Putin.
And where does that
not.
leave America on the world stage?
Well, it certainly is
the world stage.
It certainly is a problem for America in the region that they're supporting the Iraqi government, who is supported by Iran, which is a Shiite-orientated government, whereas they want to topple a Shiite government in Syria, which is also supported by Iran. So, you know, the coherence of the American policy in the region is somewhat debatable.
No, it's not. But the problem, it's not coherent. I agree with you. And I'm saying Russia's got a much more coherent
Absolutely,
policy.
they have a strategy.
Okay, now at this point, let's move on to another issue, that being the Paris climate deal. And of course, Trump blaming the Chinese, saying it's a hoax and it's all their fault. Jeanette, what do you think is likely going to happen in view of what you've been saying about Trump dealing with the realities of what it means to be leading or running a government?
Well, he's talked about how he thinks it's a hoax, and he's made it very clear that he's not going to support this. And without America's support, then the climate change deal is in jeopardy. But, I mean, he's also going to be focusing very much on the domestic agenda. One of his first priorities is going to be unravelling Obamacare, the health insurance program that President Obama introduced for millions of poorer Americans. And so he'll be focusing very much on America turning inwards. And I mean, he is more focused on dealing with domestic problems. Usually it's later on in a term that a president will turn to foreign policy issues.
Do you think that's going to be the case, Rachel, that he's going to basically sort of retreat from the world that quickly and just focus all his energies on domestic issues?
I don't think he can retreat entirely, but I do think that if a lot of his support is, you know, domestic focus at home, I think that'll be part of it. I mean, I think the climate accords, he could overturn those more quickly than the Iran deal. I mean, I feel like there are some things that maybe it's just, again, a question of priorities. What will he do first?
I think people need to understand that a lot of what he did, what Obama did as president, because he was facing such an obstructionist Congress, was to act through executive orders. The Iran deal is not a treaty. That's not a question of a treaty. A lot of the underpinnings of that deal are executive orders, and Trump can come in and just cross them out.
And being the businessman that he is, where he's used to running the show, he's very likely, I assume, to perhaps go down that path of implementing.
Again, I would say if he thinks that he can get a better deal by doing that, then probably he will do it. I think part of the hour-and-a-half long conversation with Obama was one in which Obama said, you're not going to get a better deal on this. And you can't, and not for moral reasons, but as a negotiator, you are not going to get a better deal than this.
We're coming towards the end of the show, but very quickly, and not less or least important, is the issue of abortion rights and Roe versus Wade. I mean, I'm now going to ask you as a panel, do you think, again, that he's going to go through with his promise to overturn this law, which effectively has protected abortion rights in the state since 1973?
This is where Trump, the candidate, goes up against Trump, the president, goes up against Trump, the pre-candidate, goes up against his own electorate, goes up against social conventions in the United States. I mean, Trump himself has changed his position on this over the years. Is this the primary issue that he will go after? I don't know. I don't necessarily believe that he's going to do it.
It's the issue that won him the evangelical vote.
Do you know?
Well, before he used to be a abortion rights supporter. He had what were called New York values, and as you say, he keeps changing his position. So it's very hard to predict.
I think I'm more comfortable that he won't jump on that issue right away. That if somebody like Ted Cruz had been elected, or because these people are hardcore believer in that. Like you said, Trump changed many times. He's a New Yorker, so he's a deal maker. Like he said that many times. So I don't think he's going to go that fast on that. Now, we're going to see who are the people that are going to be around him, because some of them are going to be maybe pressing the issue, including Mike Pence.
Especially Mike Pence.
Okay, at that point, we're going to have to wrap. I want to thank all of you for a very, very lively discussion. Thank you you were promising to be lively, and you indeed were.
Told us to be organics.
And engaging. So let me thank my guests. That, of course, being Daily Beast's foreign editor and Paris Bureau Chief Christopher Dickey. Also, Janat Jalil, Rachel Donadio, New York Times correspondent, and the wonderful and ever lively Régis Le Sommier, the deputy editor of Paris Match. Coming up next is Tom Burgess-Watson with more news and headlines. Do stay with us here on France 24.